Good evening, everybody. Blessing of the Lord be upon you. I'm Father Seraphim from Ishbosheth Monastery, continuing our Bible study with the blessing of His Grace Bishop Longin. Last time we finished off the first book of Samuel. Tonight we are starting the second book of Samuel. Prophet Samuel actually had passed away before the last book was finished. And what happened by the end of the last book was that Saul and his sons, 3 of his sons, had perished in the battle. Not all of Saul's children were dead, but we'll see what happens next. Concerning King David, who had been hiding among the Philistines, trying to avoid a big battle, a civil war, etc. So, in the second book of Samuel, in the first chapter, the first thing that we hear is how an Amalekite man, and a heathen, an Egyptian perhaps, a stranger to the Israelites, runs up to David and tells him that he was the one who finished off Saul. Saul was wounded, as we saw previously, by arrows, and then he asked one of his soldiers to help him impale himself on a sword so he doesn't fall into the hands of the heathens. And when this young heathen Amalekite came up, Saul was still alive, and it was Saul himself who asked him to finish him off. And this young man did, and he came up to David and told him this, expecting some kind of recognition. However, David promptly executed the young man because he had killed the Lord's anointed. We're going to read verses 15 and 16 here. And David called one of the young men and said, Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, Thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth had testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. I'm trying to make a point of the anointed. Saul was God's anointed, and even after it clearly said, God himself clearly said to Saul and to Samuel and any relevant party in the story that God's spirit was departed from Saul, yet to David, the fact that Saul was anointed, the fact was so important that he didn't dare personally kill him when he had a chance twice previously. And now that he saw a young man, an Amalekite, boasting that he did, he immediately had him executed because he killed the Lord's anointed. And then one might find this peculiar after all the drama and all the violence and all the pursuit. Saul tried to kill David so many times. Now that Saul was definitely dead, David makes a lamentation. We're going to read 17 through 27, first chapter, second book of Samuel. And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan, his son. That was his absolute best friend in the world, like a brother. And he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Yasher. The beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Askelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, the shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thy high places. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. This is a sincere lamentation by David for the Lord's anointed, Saul, and for his son Jonathan, that was David's best friend, brother. You remember when we read in the first book of Samuel how they became friends, inseparable. David is mourning here, basically, the lack of repentance on the part of Saul, because he mentions all the wonderful things that Saul had done for Israel. Had Saul remained normal, we would say nowadays, had he followed God's will, God's commandments, the Spirit of God would have remained upon him. Had Saul remained humble, God's grace would have abided with him, and he would have been a great ruler of Israel all of his life. And here is the ruin of a man who should have been a great ruler, but because of his disobedience, basically became powerless. And he was given over to the Philistines to kill him. This is almost reminiscent of the times when Israel collectively would rebel against the Lord, and the Lord was ready to annihilate them, and then Moses would pray for the people of Israel and ask God to have mercy upon them. Remember that story, how thousands of people, Israelites, stood with the rebels, the traitors, and the ground opened up and swallowed them. They perished. Many times, many people perished, thousands, for their rebellion, for their disobedience. In this case, what had happened, they perished in war. They didn't perish from a plague. Ground didn't open up and swallow them. They perished in war. And it wasn't just anonymous people. It wasn't just evildoers. It was King Saul, God's anointed. So we go on from the lament of King David, the end of chapter 1. In chapter 2, we see there actually is something like a civil war starting between one of Saul's living children, one of his sons, Ishboshet, and one of his captains, one of his allies called Abner. We're going to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, just to get an idea about that. And it came to pass after this, that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, Go up. And David said, Whither shall I go up? And he said unto Hebron. And David went up thither, and his two wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. and his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. You can look on the map today. Hebron is a town not far from Jerusalem, to the south of Jerusalem. And the men of Judah came, and they were anointed, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. And David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I also will requite you this kindness, because ye have done this thing. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened, and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah have anointed me king over them. After that, Ishbosheth and Abner devised a way to fight against David with quite a multitude of other people belonging to the tribes of Israel. David is living in Hebron, and there he has sons with his wives. Just for the record, we'll read them off. Eventually, there will be a point to all of that. Verses 2 through 5 of chapter 3. Unto David were sons born in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and his second Hileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite, and the third Absalom, the son of Maach, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and the fourth Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth Shephatiah, the son of Abital, and the sixth Ithream by Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. David apparently acquired more wives and had sons with them. Now, Ishbosheth and Abner, like we said, were building up, if we can say, successfully starting a war against David. But then the two of them had a falling out because of a concubine that was of King Saul. And Ishbosheth came out too strong against Abner, and Abner decided to go over to David's side, defected in this great civil war. Verse 21, chapter 3. Abner said unto David, I will arise and go, and will gather all Israel unto my lord the king, that they may make a league with thee, and that thou mayest reign over all that thy heart desireth. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. This is something that Abner actually did, honored. He went back and recruited most of these people that were in civil war against David and those who were with him, recruited them to come over and join King David. So, Joab, David's servant, killed Abner because he thought that Abner didn't deserve to be accepted into the ranks of David's army. Now, the interesting thing is, because Abner was in the process of bringing so many people over to David's side, David decided to have a major public burial and mourning for Abner as a wonderful, good man who was working on the unifying of Israel, bringing the people of Israel out of a civil war. We'll read here verses 36 and 37 from chapter 3. After David had done this great big public funeral and mourning, it says, "And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. For all the people and all Israel understood that day that it was not of the king to slay Abner, the son of Ner. And the king said unto his servants, Know ye not that there is a prince and a great man fallen this day in Israel? And I am this day weak, though anointed king. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, be too hard for me. The Lord shall reward the doer of evil according to his wickedness." Again, just like we saw David's mourning for the death of Saul, for the perishing of a certain part of Israel, now we saw David's sincere mourning for the man who wanted to stop the civil war that was happening within Israel. We go on to chapter 5. After this, we're just going to read verses 1 through 5 to start with. "Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that leddest out and broughtest in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah." David was established as the king. Ishboshet was murdered by 2 men, and David basically took complete control, if we can say, over all of Israel. And then he had more sons. Verses 13 through 16. "And David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem, after he was come from Hebron, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David. These be the names of those that were born unto him in Jerusalem: Shammua, and Shobab, and Nathan, and Solomon, Ibhar also, and Elishua, and Nepheg, and Japhia, and Elishama, and Eliada, and Eliphalet." Notice that Solomon is in there on the list. Solomon is going to be very important. So, David then went to war against the Philistines 3 times. The Lord told him all 3 times to go ahead and go to war, and he will be victorious, which he was. He had basically neutralized the threat of the Philistines to the people of Israel, and was firmly established as the ruler. Now, being who he was, being God's anointed, David wanted to do something about the blessing, bringing the blessing of the Lord upon Israel in a more open way, more manifested way. We get to chapter 6, and we read how David wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant over to where he was. So David goes with a big group of people to move the Ark. And here's an important detail not to be skipped, something that appears even in a lot of the iconography in our churches to this day. This is chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. When they came to Nahon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God, and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error. And there he died by the ark of God. And David was displeased, because the Lord had made a breach upon Uzzah. And he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day, which means literally the breach of Uzzah. Uzzah was not just trying to help. He knew that he shouldn't approach something that holy and just prop it up with his hands as he did. So, because of his irreverence, we can say, toward the holy things, the Lord immediately struck him down, and he fell dead by the Ark of the Covenant. Then David left the Ark of the Covenant in a certain place before he continued the journey because of this very event. And then, after he knew that continuing the transfer of the Ark was blessed, he did continue it. So now we are going to read verses 13 through 23 of chapter 6. And it was so that when they that bare the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, that was his first wife, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in his place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And as soon as David had made an end of offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he dealt among all the people, even among the whole multitude of Israel, as well as to the women as men, to every one a cake of bread, and a good piece of flesh, and a flagon of wine. So all the people departed, every one to his house. Sounds like a church celebration of our day, doesn't it? There's liturgy, there's Holy of Holies, and after liturgy, there is a common meal and fellowship, a cake of bread, and a good piece of flesh, and a flagon of wine. Things haven't changed in the past 3,000 years. Then David returned to bless his household, and Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself today in the eyes of the handmaids of his servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovereth himself." And David said unto Michal, "It was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and before all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore will I play before the Lord. And I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be base in my own sight. And of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of of them shall I be head in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child unto the day of her death. David had not disgraced himself by jumping and dancing and singing before the ark. It was a sincere celebration of the holiest thing they had coming into their midst, so their life would be centered around it. It will be the centerpiece of their life to come for many years to come. David was sincerely celebrating God's blessing being given to his people, and his first wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, despised him for it, thinking it was disgraceful. So using her language, he said, I will disgrace myself even more. I will be even more vile before all of these people, whom she obviously despised herself, because approaching things in this way was actually a reflection, once again, of David's humility, not of his silliness or stupidity or indiscretion, as Michal had taught. And therefore, she had no offspring until the day she died. In all of these stories about King David up until now, we can see that he is a very emotional individual, a very sincere individual, also by default a very humble individual. These are, we could say in today's lingo that we use, these are his strengths and weaknesses. So far, we have seen how they are his strengths. In the chapters to come, we are going to see if some of these characteristics of King David are also going to prove to be his weaknesses. Next time we shall continue chapter 7 of the second book of Samuel. Until then, the blessing of the Lord be with all of you, and good night.